Welcome, curious minds. Have you ever wondered how foreign investment flows into the U.S. economy, not just fueling growth, but also potentially opening a door to a new life for investors? Today, we're taking a focused look at a really unique program that links these two powerful ideas. The EB5 Immigrant Investor Program. It was actually created by Congress way back in 1990. And at its heart, it offers a pathway for eligible investors, along with their spouses and unmarried children under 21, to become lawful permanent residents of the United States. Basically, it's a way you could potentially earn a green card by investing capital and, crucially, creating American jobs.
That's exactly right. The core goal of the EB5 program is pretty straightforward, but, well, incredibly impactful. It's all about stimulating the U.S. economy through job creation and capital infusion from foreign nationals. It's managed by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. You probably know it as USCIS. And it sets aside about 10,000 visas each year just for this purpose. So our aim here is really to break down exactly what this program involves, how it actually functions, and what it might mean for you, whether you're maybe an aspiring investor or just someone keen to understand how global capital and immigration connect.
Okay, perfect. So let's unpack what it actually takes to, get started on this path. When you look at the fundamental requirements for the EB5 route, it really seems to boil down to two critical pillars, right? A substantial capital investment and the creation of jobs.
Exactly. That's the core. Every single EB5 investor must put capital into what's called a new commercial enterprise. And this isn't just, any old business you decide to buy into. It generally needs to have been established after November 29, 1990. Or if it is an older business, it needs to be fundamentally restructured, reorganized, or significantly expanded. We're talking at least 40% growth in either its net worth or the number of employees. And that needs to be a direct result of your investment. It really ensures your capital is boosting economic activity.
Okay, new commercial enterprise.
Yeah.
What kind of businesses actually qualify? Is it limited to certain sectors?
It's actually surprisingly broad, which is part of its flexibility, I think. It could be anything from a sole proprietorship, a partnership, corporation, an LLC, or even a joint venture. The absolute key is that it has to be a for-profit business involved in lawful activity. So, for instance, just buying a personal house wouldn't count. That's not a commercial enterprise designed to make profit and create jobs in the way the program intends.
Right, that makes total sense. And the capital itself, what actually counts as capital here? Does it have to be, actual cash?
Well, capital is pretty broadly defined. It includes cash, sure, but also things like equipment, inventory, other tangible property, basically real, personal, or mixed assets that you own and control. They value these at fair market value in U.S. dollars. But here's where it gets really fundamental to the program's integrity. All that capital must be acquired through lawful means. And you'll need, believe me, meticulous documentation to prove this. Think tax records, property sales documents, maybe proof of gifts or inheritance, even loans sometimes. And maybe the most crucial principle, the entire investment must be at risk.
At risk. Okay, that sounds like a really significant point for anyone investing. What does that mean specifically in this context?
It's absolutely vital. It's designed to ensure genuine economic commitment, right? To prevent the program from just being a sort of loan scheme with guaranteed returns. And it means you cannot have any guaranteed returns or any contractual rights to get your money back. Your investment has to be exposed to the possibility of gain or loss, just like any real business venture. Now, the new commercial enterprise might, down the road, offer a buyback option, but that's at their discretion. The initial investment can't come with that kind of guarantee. Interestingly, sometimes even a promissory note, basically your promise to pay, can count as capital under certain conditions. So there's some flexibility there too.
Got it. So real skin in the game, essentially. Now, shifting over to the job creation side, what are the specifics there? How many jobs? What kind? Right? Jobs. You have to create, or in some specific cases, preserve at least 10 permanent full-time jobs. And these jobs have to be for qualifying employees. Now, a qualifying employee is a U.S. citizen, a lawful permanent resident, a green card holder, or another immigrant who is authorized to work in the U.S. It explicitly does not include the investor or their spouse or their children. It's really about creating opportunities for the U.S. workforce.
Okay, 10 jobs. And what's the definition of full-time here? Does it mean one person working 40 hours?
Good question. Full-time means a position that requires a minimum of 35 working hours per week. Now, a job-sharing arrangement is possible where maybe 2 or more qualifying employees share one full-time slot. That can count, but only if the total hours meet that 35-hour minimum. What doesn't count is just combining multiple part-time jobs to hit the 35 hours. They're looking for sustained, dedicated employment roles. Also, things like intermittent, temporary, or seasonal jobs. Those are generally out unless they're part of a project where that kind of employment is expected to last at least 2 years. So yeah, they want to see real stable jobs, not just temporary gigs.
What about investing in a business that's, maybe struggling a bit rather than starting something brand new? Is that an option?
Yes, absolutely. And that's designed to help stabilize existing jobs, which is also valuable. If you invest in what's called a troubled business, and that's defined as one that's been around for at least 2 years and has had a significant net loss, like 20% of its net worth recently, you can rely on job maintenance. In that situation, you just need to show that the number of existing employees is maintained. It needs to stay at or above the level it was at before your investment for at least 2 years. So think of it as saving jobs rather than creating brand new ones. It's about stabilizing a struggling company.
Okay, so we've covered the what, the capital, the jobs. Now let's get into the how much and the different ways investors can actually participate.
Right, the money. The minimum investment amounts have actually seen some pretty significant updates recently. This was mainly part of reforms aimed at steering more capital to areas that really need it. So for petitions filed since March 15, 2022, the standard minimum investment is $1,050,000. However, that amount drops significantly down to $800,000 if your investment is in what's called a targeted employment area, or TEA, or an infrastructure project.
Yeah.
Just for context, before those 2022 changes, the amounts were different, $1 million standard and $500,000 for TAs. And these amounts, the $1.05 million and $800,000, they're also set to be adjusted for inflation every 5 years. The first adjustment is scheduled for January 1, 2027.
Okay, wow. So that lower investment threshold for specific areas, that's a pretty powerful incentive, like you said. What exactly are these targeted employment areas, these TEAs?
Good question. A TEA is defined in one of two ways. It's either a rural area or it's an area experiencing significantly high unemployment. High unemployment here means specifically at least 150% of the national average unemployment rate. A rural area is typically defined as somewhere outside a metropolitan statistical area or outside a city or town with a population of 20,000 or more. And the high unemployment areas are based on specific census tracts, where the business you're investing in is primarily operating. Now, here's a key change from the reforms. These TEA designations, particularly the high unemployment ones, are now made directly by the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, not by state or local governments anymore. This was a really critical change to address past criticisms about, well, gerrymandering, where developers might cleverly combine wealthy areas with distant high unemployment tracts just to qualify for that lower investment amount. This change aims for more integrity.
That sounds like a really significant shift, yeah. Tackling those past concerns head on. And what about infrastructure projects? What falls into that category?
Right, infrastructure projects. This refers to a capital investment project that's administered by a governmental entity. Think federal, state, or local government agency or authority. And it's specifically for public works projects. So things like maintaining, improving, or building roads, bridges, transit systems, utilities, that kind of essential public infrastructure. These are often huge projects needing lots of capital and creating many jobs, so they fit well with the program's goals.
Okay. And beyond the types of projects, you mentioned different pathways for investing. How does an investor actually get involved day to day or not?
Exactly. There are basically two main routes an investor can take. First is direct investment. This is where you, the investor, are directly involved in managing or directing the new commercial enterprise, maybe through day-to-day management or through policy formulation. And the jobs you create have to be direct employees of that business, an actual employer-employee relationship on the payroll. This direct path is a permanent feature of the EB5 program. The second route, and honestly the much more common one, is investing through the Regional Center program. Now, this is technically a pilot program, but it's been reauthorized multiple times, currently through September 30, 2027. It lets you invest your capital through a USCIS designated regional center. These centers essentially pull money from multiple EB5 investors to fund larger, often more complex projects.
Interesting. It sounds like that regional center route might offer a different kind of experience for the investor. Why do you think most people tend to choose that path?
Well, it's largely down to flexibility, especially around the job creation requirement. See, regional centers allow investors to count not just direct jobs, those working right there at the enterprise, but also indirect jobs, and sometimes induced jobs too. Indirect jobs are those created, say, in the supply chain or with service providers because of the project's economic activity. Induced jobs come from the spending of the direct and indirect employees in the local community. And here's the kicker. Up to 90% of the required 10 jobs for a regional center investor can actually be met through these indirect or induced jobs. They're usually calculated using approved economic models. So this generally means much less day-to-day management responsibility for the investor themselves, which is, frankly, very attractive to many people who are primarily seeking residency, not necessarily to run a U.S. business hands-on. In fact, historically, something like over 90% of all EB5 admissions came through regional center investments.
Wow, 90%. That's huge. It definitely sounds appealing for someone looking for a more passive investment structure. And it's amazing to think how these projects can fuel really large-scale developments. You hear about hotels, resorts, big office buildings, even major infrastructure like that I-95 Pennsylvania Turnpike Connector project.
Absolutely. These projects often have a really significant economic footprint. They inject substantial capital directly into the U.S. economy, and while getting precise, comprehensive data across the entire program history can be a bit challenging, the studies that have been done definitely highlight the impact. For example, a Department of Commerce study back in 2017 estimated that EB5 projects generated over $16 billion in total investment spending in just a couple of years, FY 2012-2013. About $5.8 billion of that was directly from the EB5 investors themselves, and it led to an estimated 174,000 jobs supported over that period. Another study, looking just at the regional center program for 2014-2015, identified around $11 billion in capital investment and estimated it supported over 350,000 jobs, with a lot of that, about two-thirds, in construction. So it really does represent a significant boost in capital and job support, and importantly, without direct cost to U.S. taxpayers.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. If someone listening is thinking, okay, this path might be interesting for me, what's the actual journey like? Step by step from deciding to invest to actually getting that permanent green card. Sounds complex.
It definitely is a detailed process, yes.
Yeah.
It has several distinct phases, and it requires a good deal of patience and very thorough preparation.
All right, walk us through it. Where does it begin?
Okay, it usually starts with what we can call investor preparation. This phase alone can take, say, 1 to 3 months, sometimes longer. The most critical part here, and often the most challenging, is proving the lawful source of your investment funds. Every single dollar. You need really extensive documentation. We're talking tax returns going back several years, bank statements, maybe contracts if you sold property or a business, proof if you received a gift or inheritance, loan documents, everything tracing the money back to a legitimate origin. The burden of proof on the investor here is very high. So this is often the most document-heavy stage.
Wow, okay. So meticulous financial groundwork first. What's the next official step after you've got all that documentation together?
Next comes filing the actual petition with the USCIS. This is typically Form I-526, Immigrant Petition by Alien Entrepreneur, or if you're investing through a regional center, it's Form I-526E, Immigrant Petition by Regional Center Investor. This is almost always done with the help of an experienced immigration attorney. The petition outlines your investment, the business plan, the job creation strategy, details about the project if it's a regional center investment, and of course, all that evidence showing the lawful source of your funds. USCIS then reviews this petition, and this part takes time. Currently, processing times can unfortunately range anywhere from, say, 18 months to 30 months, maybe even longer in some cases. Although the new integrity measures do allow for expedited processing in certain situations, particularly for investments in rural areas, which reflects the program's goal to channel funds there.
Right, 18 to 30 months just for that initial review. That's a significant waiting period. What happens once, hopefully, that I-526 or I-526E petition gets approved?
Okay, so once that's approved, you move to the next major phase, getting your conditional green card and entering the U.S. if you're not already here. This part might take another 6 to 12 months. If you're living outside the U.S. at the time of approval, you'll apply for an immigrant visa through a U.S. consulate abroad using Form DS-260 and attending an interview. If you're already legally in the U.S. on another visa, you might be able to file for adjustment of status using Form I-485 to get your green card without leaving the country. And actually, under the newer rules, if a visa number is immediately available for your country, you might even be able to file your I-526E petition and your I-485 adjustment application concurrently at the same time. That can really speed things up for people already here. Once everything is approved through either process, you and your qualifying family members, that's your spouse, and unmarried children under 21 receive conditional permanent resident cards or green cards. These are valid for 2 years. This is a huge milestone. You are now officially U.S. residents, but on a conditional basis initially.
Okay, so you're living and working in the U.S., but it's conditional. What's the final hurdle then to make that residency permanent?
The final and absolutely crucial step is removing the conditions on your residency. This involves filing another petition, Form I-829, Petition by Investor, to remove conditions on permanent resident status. You have to file this I-829 during a specific 90-day window right before your 2-year conditional green card expires. Don't miss that window. And in this petition, you basically need to prove two main things. First, that you actually invested the required capital and, importantly, sustained that investment throughout your 2 years of conditional residency, that it remained at risk. Second, you need to prove that the new commercial enterprise created or was actively in the process of creating the required 10 full-time jobs. You'll need evidence like financial records, payroll documents, tax forms, business licenses, and for regional center investors relying on indirect jobs, updated economic impact reports.
Right. So proving you followed through on the initial promises. If you piece this whole journey together there, from gathering those first documents through the I-526 conditional residency and finally the I-829 approval, what kind of total time frame are we realistically looking at? It really sounds like a marathon.
It absolutely is a marathon, not a sprint. You're
Yeah.
right. Realistically, from the very beginning, preparing your source of funds documents all the way through to getting that permanent unconditional green card after the I-829 is approved, the entire process can easily take anywhere from, say, 4 to 6 years. And honestly, it could be even longer, especially for investors from countries like China or India, where historically demand has been very high, leading to visa backlogs because of the per-country limits on visas. So yes, it definitely requires significant long-term planning and commitment.
Wow. Okay. Now, the EB5 program sounds like this really strategic pathway, but you mentioned it's also, evolved quite a bit and faced some pretty significant challenges, some scrutiny over the years. What have been some of those major shifts or maybe controversies?
That's true. It hasn't always been smooth sailing for the program. It was actually kind of underutilized for its first decade or so. But then interest really surged, especially after the 2008 financial crisis. Traditional financing dried up for a while, and EB5 became a really attractive alternative source of funding, particularly for big real estate developments. And that led to this huge explosion in the number of designated regional centers. There were only a handful back in 2007, but by 2023 there were hundreds. It really shows how much the program grew in popularity as a funding mechanism.
Interesting. And looking at the investors themselves, where have most of them typically come from over the years?
Historically, yeah, investors from mainland China absolutely dominated the program. For many years, they represented well over 80% of all the EB5 applications filed and visas issued. Now, new filings from China have dropped off quite dramatically in the last few years, down to only about 2.5% of new petitions in fiscal year 2022. But because of those huge backlogs from previous years, Chinese nationals still make up the largest group actually receiving their green cards or visas currently, as those older approved petitions finally reach the front of the line. We've also seen really significant participation, especially more recently, from countries like India, Vietnam, South Korea, and Brazil. So the pool of investors has definitely become more diverse over time.
Now, this program, while it clearly offers benefits, hasn't escaped controversy, has it? What have been some of the most significant points of concern or scrutiny, particularly around issues like fraud or maybe national security?
No, it certainly hasn't escaped scrutiny. You're right. There have really been two main types of fraud that have plagued the program at times. One is, unfortunately, immigration benefit fraud by some applicants themselves, maybe misrepresenting where their money came from or their intentions. But the other type, which has perhaps gotten more headlines, involves the defrauding of legitimate good faith investors by third parties. This could be unscrupulous regional center operators or maybe project developers. We've seen some really high-profile cases, like the J-Peak ski resort fraud in Vermont, where hundreds of millions in investor funds were allegedly misappropriated. Or cases like Green Tech Automotive, where the promised job creation didn't happen, leaving investors potentially facing deportation because the program requirements weren't met. Those situations are devastating for the investors. Beyond fraud, lawmakers and government agencies have also raised concerns periodically about potential national security vulnerabilities, like ensuring illicit actors aren't using the program, and also about potential money laundering risks. This has definitely led to calls for and implementation of tighter oversight.
Right. And I remember hearing quite a bit about that issue of gerrymandering the targeted employment areas. How exactly did that problem play out?
Ah, yes, the TA gerrymandering. That was a really major point of criticism for years. Essentially, developers and sometimes state agencies became quite skilled at, well, creatively drawing TE boundaries. They would link a census tract where a project was located, often in a pretty wealthy urban area with maybe several other tracts, sometimes miles away, that did have high unemployment. By averaging the unemployment rate across this oddly shaped collection of tracts, they can make the project location qualify as a high unemployment TEA, thus qualifying investors for the lower investment amount.
$500,000 back then. This often directly contradicted the program's original intent, which was to drive investment into genuinely distressed rural or high unemployment communities, not just provide cheaper capital for luxury projects in prime locations. The EB5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022 thankfully directly tackled this. As we mentioned, now only DHS can designate these high unemployment TEAs, and the rules for combining census tracts are much, much stricter. It really aimed to shut down that practice.
Okay, so it's clearly a program with layers of complexity, ongoing debates, and it's constantly evolving to address these issues. But let's flip back to the positive side. What about its actual measurable economic impact here in the U.S.?
Right. Despite the challenges, the economic impact seems pretty substantial based on the available studies. That 2017 Department of Commerce study we touched on, it estimated $16.7 billion in total investment spending connected to EB5 projects just between FY 2012 and 2013. About $5.8 billion of that was the direct EB5 capital, and it was estimated to support around 174,000 American jobs over that period. And the 2019 study, focusing just on the Regional Center program, found about $11 billion in capital investment and estimated support for over 355,000 jobs for the 2014-2015 period alone. A big chunk of that, about two-thirds, was in the construction sector, which makes sense given the types of large projects often funded. So while it may be hard to pin down exact numbers year by year, it definitely points to a significant infusion of foreign capital and support for hundreds of thousands of U.S. jobs over the years, all funded by private investment.
So wrapping things up then, what does this all mean for you, the listener? The EB5 Immigrant Investor Program really stands out as a unique and pretty robust pathway to getting permanent U.S. residency. It offers that distinct advantage of not needing an employer sponsor or a family member petitioning for you. It's a route you can initiate yourself based on investment. For those who have the necessary capital and can navigate the requirements, it offers the freedom to live, work, or study anywhere you want in the U.S. And crucially, it opens up a direct path towards U.S. citizenship after you've held your green card for 5 years.
It really is a powerful tool for individuals and families seeking long-term opportunity and a future in America. It effectively combines those personal immigration goals with making a tangible economic contribution here. Now, as we've discussed, it's certainly not without its complexities. There are significant processing times, extremely detailed documentation requirements for sorts of funds, and the investment must truly be at risk. But the 2022 Reform and Integrity Act really did aim to address many of the program's long-standing weak points, especially around oversight, fraud prevention, and trying to ensure investments go to the areas Congress intended, like rural communities and needed infrastructure projects, which now actually have specific visas set aside for them each year.
Yeah, it really does seem to serve as an engine, doesn't it? For both individual dreams and aspirations, and also for broader economic development across the country. It's a fascinating intersection.
It absolutely is. And it kind of leaves us with an important question to think about, doesn't it? In our increasingly interconnected global economy, how can investment-based immigration programs like EB5 continue to evolve? How do we best balance that goal of economic stimulus with ensuring equitable development across regions, while also maintaining really robust oversight and integrity? Finding that right balance seems key for the future.
That is a really great thought to ponder, especially in today's world. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of the EB5 program. If you found this discussion insightful, we definitely encourage you to stay curious and maybe explore more about the really intricate ways that global capital, immigration policy, and economic development intersect. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered.